If you're going to do something this heinous, all right, before you do it, just know you got to live with it for the rest of your life. So if you're thinking like, hey, I might get to a point where I can't handle doing this thing, don't do it, okay? We got some Mr. Ballin in the building. His ridiculous plan backfired with fatal consequences. I heard the Mr. Ballin storytelling. Let's get to it.
This story is about one of the world's dumbest criminals.
It's been a minute. Mr. Ballin, we're back.
So dumb, in fact, that this story really won't make sense until the end when I explain what was really going on the whole time. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week.
So
if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button has a cold, please give them some Afrin decongestant spray and assure them it's perfectly safe to use it for more than 3 days in a row. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications.
Are you not supposed to use that spray 3 days in a row? And if you do, what does it do, man? We got questions.
So you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
Yeah. Faint of heart. Let's see what this song about.
At around 9 p.m. on Saturday, October 15th, 1988, a 33-year-old woman named Cheryl Petrie grabbed a candy bar off the rack inside of PJ's Market. PJ's Market was a little convenience store in the city of Port Orchard, Washington, and it was where Cheryl worked. She was the cashier. And without ringing this candy bar up, Cheryl simply handed it across the counter to a female college student who had just come into the store to talk to Cheryl. This student had temporarily moved right next door to PJ's Market, and the student, after coming into the market and meeting Cheryl, they had immediately taken a liking to her, and so it became kind of like her routine to come into the market basically every night and just sit down and chat with Cheryl, sometimes for hours.
That's fine.
The student would talk about their day at school, they'd talk about their personal life, they'd tell Cheryl all of their problems and secrets.
As long as you home by the time the lights come on, you know what I'm saying? You can do all the chatting you want after school.
And Cheryl really became this student's confidant. And believe it or not, this was an effect that Cheryl had on lots of people. Cheryl was incredibly kind, she was empathetic, she was a great listener, she never acted like she was judging you, and she never gossiped about people. And also Cheryl had a very disarming sense of humor. It was very goofy, she was always cracking up at jokes that she had made, and so people just felt at ease around Cheryl. And they typically left interactions with her in a good mood. And on this night, when the student had come into the market, they had told Cheryl that they actually had found an apartment in Port Orchard that they were going to be moving to, so they were going to be leaving PJ's
like
where
a
they
nice
were
little
now.
city.
But the student had said
City looked like it got like a lot of culture to it.
that they really
Remind me of like Helen, Georgia a little bit. You know
had no money, and so it was going to be a challenge to furnish this apartment. Heck, it was going to be a challenge just to buy groceries for this apartment. And when Cheryl heard this, she first congratulated the student, but then also said, well, hey, I'll give you some of my own furniture because I don't need it all, and that will help you furnish the apartment. And then also Cheryl had grabbed that chocolate bar off the rack and given it to the student for free as a sort of like, you know, here's your first grocery as well. The student was totally floored by Cheryl's generosity and tried to tell her, you know, keep your furniture and you can keep this chocolate or I'll pay for it. But Cheryl insisted. She was like, nope.
Listen, I'm gonna be nice one time. For real? Yo, nah, I mean, you don't have to do that. Nah, I got you. All right, bet. You know, hand it out. I'm not about to argue. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna give you a chance to, you know, you ain't got to do this.
Tomorrow I will bring
But after that, appreciate you. You know what I'm saying?
you furniture and please take this candy bar. And so the student finally relented and thanked Cheryl profusely. And really, this behavior was so typical of Cheryl. She was a single mom raising a 9-year-old girl and a baby boy, and so she worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. On the weekends, she worked at PJ's Market, and then during the week, she worked at a Ford car dealership. But despite being totally swamped basically all the time providing for her family, any spare time Cheryl had, she tried to give it to other people, whether that was helping a coworker with their resume or baking some goodies for a sick friend at church. Cheryl was all about helping other people. The area of Port Orchard where Cheryl lived was only about...
His ridiculous plan backfired with fatal consequences. All right, chat, look. You know, I'm in my prediction game. He hasn't mentioned a guy yet in his video, so I don't know where this is going, but we listening.
About an hour away from the big city of Seattle, but to Cheryl, this part of Port Orchard felt much farther away than that. She lived in this tiny little blue single-story house that was tucked away in the woods, surrounded by all these tall trees. The road to her house was very rural and winding, and so where she lived felt very isolated. It was a beautiful area, no doubt, but it was also kind of a bad neighborhood. In fact, a man had been shot and killed not far from Cheryl's house just a year earlier. But this home was all she could afford. Basically, Cheryl was poor and had almost nothing of her own. But whatever she did have, she was far more likely to give away than keep for herself.
Okay.
Eventually, Cheryl would tell the college student that she really needed to get back to the other customers and kind of do her job and not just sit here and chat this whole time. And so the student said, thank you again for the candy and for the offer of the free furniture. And then the student left the store, at which point Cheryl reached into her pocket and grabbed some change and dumped it in the register to pay for the candy bar. Even though Cheryl knew she very likely could have gotten away with simply giving out the candy and not paying for it, Cheryl was unfailingly honest, and so she knew she wanted to pay for the candy. Cheryl would man the register until 11 p.m. that night, chatting with many more regulars who came in and out, and then at 11 p.m., Cheryl locked the front door, and then she checked the register to make sure it was all balanced and all the cash was in there, and then by 11:15, she was calling her boss to report that her shift had gone fine and that she was taking off for the night. After Cheryl had left...
Hey, I don't know what type of employment they're getting up there, but this is how you keep communities together. You call your boss, hey, boss, I'm locking up, leaving. You ask somebody to do that these days, you might get the people's elbow at the next employee meeting.
And locked the store behind her. She made her way out to her beat-up silver sedan car that was parked outside, and then she began the drive back home, knowing that she'd be right back to PJ's the very next morning, right when it opened at 7 a.m. At the same time that Cheryl...
She's working 7 in the morning till 11? 15 hours? Yo.
was wrapping up for
I'm gonna need more than one free candy bar, big fella.
the night and making her way home. Her ex-husband, Roland Pitre, who lived on the other side of town, was very excited. This was the night that Roland was going to win back Cheryl. Roland glanced at his watch and saw it was just past 11 p.m., and so it was almost time. He imagined how happy Cheryl would be when he unveiled his big surprise. She would run to him, and he would hold her and tell her how much he loved her and how he had always loved her. Roland hadn't yet figured out how he was going to explain his big plan to win back his ex to his current girlfriend, but he figured...
Does he want to die? He's done. He's done. Yo, dog. Yo. What would you do if your significant other was like, yo, I got a plan. I'm going to get my ex back. AK-47s, Mac 11s, Glocks, and 9s. You're done.
He would just work that out later. The most important thing for Roland right now was showing Cheryl how wrong and stupid he had been and how much he needed her and how much she needed him. Also, he knew their kids would be totally thrilled if they got back together. Roland was looking after their son and daughter that weekend, and he had seen firsthand that his daughter was clearly very upset about the fact that her parents were split up. Roland and Cheryl had a very complicated history, but Roland knew, really, their breakup was his fault. They had met about 12 years earlier when Roland had been on leave from the military. At the time, Roland was a Marine sergeant, and he was also a very accomplished judo instructor. He was handsome and charismatic, and he had a charming Creole accent because he had grown up in a Cajun French family near New Orleans. But despite how appealing Roland looked, he actually was kind of a terrible romantic partner. Every woman he had ever been with, he had cheated on and then made up elaborate lies to cover it up. But regardless, Cheryl had fallen head over heels in love with Roland. And part of the reason that happened was because Cheryl was actually pretty insecure. She had long auburn hair and beautiful blue eyes and this amazing personality. But to Cheryl, she felt like she was kind of plain looking, and she also felt like she was kind of chubby, and she got the sense that men kind of did not find her all that attractive. And when
Cheryl has an amazing personality, that's gonna get you far enough. Look, her ex about to come on bended knee. And back to that. You know what I'm saying? So clearly she had to have some of that, you know what I'm saying, too. So Hey,
When she
man.
met Roland, she saw right away that the other women he had been with were these overtly glamorous and beautiful women. And so when she noticed Roland taking an interest in her, I mean, it was
Bro, that's why focus on being a good person. You be a good person, you win there. But his ridiculous plan backfired with fatal consequences. I'm still trying to get it because there's a reason they told the story about the girl moving. Because I would say that the ex is going to, you know what I'm saying, send him to the shadow realm for trying to get back with his ex. But that's too easy. That's too easy. We gotta think something else.
incredible. She felt so lucky.
Get some more of the story.
And so
real
Roland
quick.
and Cheryl had gotten married, they'd had their daughter together, and then basically right away, Roland had begun cheating on Cheryl. They ended up getting divorced 8 years earlier in 1980, and it was right around this point that Roland really just totally blew his life up. The woman Roland was cheating on Cheryl with was also married, and so Roland came up with this plot to murder this woman's husband. And the husband would get murdered, but when Roland was on trial, the prosecutors couldn't really untangle what his actual role was in the murder. It was not clear if he really was the guy who did the killing, or if he simply had kind of come up with the idea and other people.
Yo, this is a sick man. All right, you get a wife, you have kids with her, you cheat on her. You cheat on her with somebody who is already married. So you say, look, you know, I got a wife, but I want yours too. We about to send him to the afterlife. And then you want to go back to your regular wife? You're done. You're done.
People had done it, and so ultimately Roland was found guilty for his role in this murder.
Zuko was good.
But he was only sentenced to 6 years in prison.
We ain't seen
And
you in a
strangely
minute. Welcome
enough,
back.
it was actually during this time that Roland was in jail that he and Cheryl kind of came back to each other. While Roland was behind bars, he had this epiphany that Cheryl was the best thing that ever happened to him, and he totally screwed it up. And so he began writing her letters, telling her how much he loved her.
Listen, don't listen to nobody who is trapped in a situation. They will say anything for somebody to accept them in that situation. But as soon as they get out that situation, chat, they out of here.
How sorry he was for being unfaithful. And also he began explaining that, you know, the charges he was found guilty of in connection to this murder were totally not true, that he had been screwed. And Cheryl had eventually begun writing back to Roland, telling him that she still loved him too. And they actually would get remarried while Roland was in prison. And then when he got out of prison, he moved in with Cheryl and their...
Unplug my headphones. Very valuable information is being spit right here, man.
Roland was in prison. And then when he got out of prison...
No. Okay. I still don't know why the story's at the beginning, but now I'm starting to believe the ex who he killed her husband, she's got to try to kill his new wife. Cause like, you killed my husband, now you want to go back to your old girl? I'm about to get you. That might be the story, chat. I don't know.
Then he moved in with Cheryl and their daughter in Port Orchard, and they would have another baby together, their son, and then also Roland enrolled in nursing school. And so for a time, this family was back together and everything was great. But eventually, Roland went back to his old ways and began cheating on Cheryl again.
I told you, he got out of jail. He paid it forward a little bit. Okay, yeah, I'm going to give you another baby, girl. You like that? And then as soon as the baby sat her down, my man was back outside. He's done.
And before long, the couple had separated again and began living separately. And so fast forward back to the night of October 15th, 1988, and Roland is anxiously waiting to begin this big plan to win Cheryl back. And he glances at his watch and he sees it's now 11:30 p.m., which means it's go time. And so Roland he stands up really quickly and begins walking towards the front door of his house when suddenly he feels so lightheaded that he actually falls back on the couch and passes out cold. Roland had serious blood pressure issues, and sometimes if he stood up too quickly, it would make him feel really dizzy and he would faint, and so that's what happened. And then at some point after he fainted, Roland kind of came to, but he was in such a fog mentally that instead of, going out and doing this big plan to win Cheryl back, he just kind of wandered his way upstairs and climbed in bed with his girlfriend and fell asleep for the rest of the night. Cheryl was due back at PJ's Market the next morning at 7 a.m. She was going to open the store and also drop off that furniture with the college student. But when the first customers, including that college student, arrived at PJ's Market, they saw the door was locked and the lights were off inside. Now, all of these customers knew Cheryl really well, and they really liked her, and they knew she should have been there by that point. This was totally uncharacteristic of Cheryl to not be there on time. And so it wasn't long before these patrons began calling Cheryl at her home. But Cheryl never picked up. However, remember, this is 1988, so people didn't have cell phones.
Yeah, true,
they
true.
used landlines, and so it was totally normal to periodically call someone and not have them pick up. It just meant they weren't home. Now, at first, people in Port Orchard just kind of assumed that, there must be a rational explanation for why Cheryl is not at work. Maybe there was a family emergency, maybe her car didn't start.
Bro, I remember you used to like leave notes and stuff like that. That's crazy.
But there had to be some sort of reasonable reason for her absence. Thank you to...
Yo, shout out to BetterHelp, man. You know what I'm saying? Link is in the description.
With a therapist who will listen and help.
Over there, Mr. Ball.
That night, Cheryl didn't show up at Roland and his girlfriend's house to collect her daughter and son. Now, Roland didn't know that Cheryl had missed work all day that day, and so he assumed Cheryl must just be running late. But by 6:30 p.m. that night, when still Cheryl had not arrived and she hadn't called, Roland finally called Cheryl, but she didn't answer, and so Roland just left Cheryl this very upbeat message on her answering machine, and then waited.
I remember this phone, bro. Listen, y'all wasn't outside. I'm sorry. Listen, you was born with an iPhone. It's okay, though. We had this exact phone in the crib, chat. That's crazy.
For her to
I better not hear no 1987 jokes, okay?
call back. But despite how cheerful this message was
That's crazy.
that
I
Roland
remember
left,
this.
it kind of
It's like
betrayed
5.
the way he actually felt. Roland was not happy. That morning, when he had woken up and realized he had slept through the night and not done the big plan to win Cheryl back, he felt so stupid. He had this chance to win her back, and he blew it. But over the next couple of hours, when Cheryl did not return Roland's call, he went from being solely worried about, how he blew this
Bro, it's definitely the new girl, bro. It's got to be.
opportunity to win his ex-wife back, to now just being
I
concerned
saw that type of phone
about his
before.
ex-wife.
Real one,
Where is she?
real
What's
one.
going on? And so late that night, Roland would actually call the police and report Cheryl missing. A deputy came out to Roland's house to take down this report, and then Roland actually gave the deputy a spare key to Cheryl's place, and then this deputy went to Cheryl's house. It was totally quiet. He knocked. There was no answer. He let himself inside using this spare key, and he found the home was totally in order. There was no sign of any disturbance whatsoever. The deputy eventually walked over to Cheryl's answering machine, and he saw there was a blinking light, which meant there were messages that had not
That was
been played
everybody
yet.
calling.
So he hit play, and the first message was from Cheryl's daughter, who was calling to say goodnight and I love you. And then there were several messages
So she
from
never made it
customers
home?
from PJ's Market that were calling to ask, why Cheryl was not at work and was she okay. There was a message from Cheryl's boss also asking, what's going on? Why aren't you at work? And then there was that message from Roland, who had called when she had not come to pick up the kids. And then the last message on the machine played, and when the deputy heard it, he knew something was terribly wrong.
Okay.
The last message
call her
was
own
from a
phone?
stranger who was calling Cheryl to be like, hey, I found your purse floating in Lake Union, which is near Seattle. And the stranger was like, I don't know if your purse was stolen
How'd they find her number, though?
and dumped here, or if you were here and you left it.
Or maybe, back then they had the yellow pages. You know what I'm saying? You remember that? Look up somebody's name, number. All right. You know what I'm
in the
saying?
water or something, but I'd love to give the purse back to you. And the stranger left a phone number for Cheryl to call so she could come and pick up her purse. Lake Union was only about an hour away from Port Orchard, where Cheryl lived,
Okay.
but there was just no real reason she would ever be around Lake Union. She never went on trips. She didn't have the time or money to, even for short ones, like going to Lake Union.
Who
an
took her
hour
to the
away.
water, Chad? Who
And
y'all
then
think it
also,
is?
I mean, Cheryl's
Throwback
entire
voicemails?
life
Facts.
was in Port Orchard, and her life was her kids, her jobs, and the church. And so there was just no logical explanation for why Cheryl's purse would be in Lake Union. But regardless, detectives from Port Orchard, along with police from Seattle, linked up and went out to Lake Union and began looking for Cheryl's car, because maybe she did go out here, maybe she did lose her purse in the water, and maybe she's still here. But Lake Union is a very busy place with lots of people and businesses living right along the water's edge, and even more people living right on the water in houseboats. And so there were literally thousands and thousands of cars all over Lake Union. So trying to find Cheryl's nondescript silver sedan took some time.
Facts.
But on the night of October 19th, so 3 days after Cheryl had failed to show up at PJ's Market for that 7 a.m. opening, police would find her car near Lake Union. And at first, it seemed like, Cheryl must have just driven here and abandoned the car for some reason, because there was no sign of a struggle.
Bro, but I can't see another woman successfully pulling this off. So maybe it's the guy that she killed, or that the husband killed for the other woman. Maybe one of his family members was like, oh, you gonna kill, my family member for his wife and go back to your old wife? Well, guess what we about to do with your old wife, big fella? That's got to be it, child. Look, shall I lock in that answer? I don't know. I feel very strongly about it.
Struggle inside or outside of the car. There was nothing strange about this car. It was just parked in a lot. But when authorities went around to the back of the car and used a screwdriver to pop open the trunk, they realized right away that...
Yo, I remember this thing too. Bro, hold up.
That could not have been what happened, because...
Bro, the vacuums that used to look like that?
Cheryl was...
Also the strollers that used to look like that?
In the trunk. And she was deceased and very clearly had been beaten to death.
That's crazy.
The investigation into Cheryl's murder would take...
Beaten to death wasn't a woman, chat. It had to be a man. You know what I'm saying? Hey, look. I'm a feminist.
Take more than a decade. The police started with Roland because, one, he was Cheryl's ex-husband, and two, because Roland had previously been convicted for his role in a murder, even though the details of exactly what he did were never really clear.
True.
But Roland had an alibi that was airtight. He had witnesses that could confirm he was nowhere near Lake Union or Cheryl on the night that she was killed. And Roland was very cooperative with police after finding out what happened to his ex-wife. I mean, he was really bent out of shape. And so Roland very quickly signed paperwork to allow detectives to come into his home and search it and search all of his things. And he also began regularly contacting the police to offer up any information he could think of that could be useful, including an odd story he told about this young man that was following Cheryl around in the few days before she died.
Hey,
he didn't know much about it, but he knew there was something odd happening with this young man. Now, Roland didn't really...
Who could this young man be, chat? What if it's the son of the other husband? Huh? Chat, I watched a movie called Tudor on Netflix. Go watch it. Just go watch it. Revenge runs way too deep for me, okay? I'm good.
Really have much more information than this suggestion that somebody was following her around. And so police were never really able to fully follow up on that lead. But police did interview virtually everybody in Cheryl's life, from her friends to her family to her co-workers at the Ford dealership and PJ's Market. They talked to people at church who knew her, and nobody really popped up as being very suspicious. Basically, everyone said, look, Cheryl was this incredible person who everybody seemed to love. It makes no sense that somebody would want to harm her.
Yeah, that's
but
crazy.
A year after Cheryl's death, the police would get their first big break in this case.
Okay.
A newspaper journalist contacted the police to let them know that this random young man had contacted him and confessed to killing Cheryl and then hung up with...
Chat, if you're going to do something this heinous, all right, before you do it, just know you got to live with it for the rest of your life. So if you're thinking like, hey, I might get to a point where I can't handle doing this thing, don't do it, okay? Simple. That's all you got to do. Don't do it. This might be bad on my conscience. Don't do it. Oh, man, I might get caught for this from 5 years from now and it'll still destroy my life. Don't do it.
without giving his name or his location or how to get in touch with him again. It was almost like this person had called just to get this huge secret off their chest, somewhat anonymously. The police convinced the journalist to actually write a story about this strange call he got to see if maybe they could flush out this young man who had just confessed. And when this article ran in the newspaper, one of Cheryl's old coworkers from the car dealership called the police to be like, hey, there was this young man who worked at this dealership with us and with Cheryl who was totally creepy and definitely had a thing.
All right, we might be wrong. We might be wrong.
For Cheryl. The coworker said this guy's name was Albie Brotsweller and that he worked in
Yo, if you have a name like that, yo, son.
the garage, and he was known as a kind of odd guy with a short temper who totally creeped out all the women who worked at the dealership. And this coworker would tell police that before Cheryl died, she had been working with Albie on his resume. And while they had been working together, Albie had developed this weird fixation on Cheryl.
That's crazy.
And when police began looking into Albie, they discovered he had quit his job at the dealership a day before Cheryl went missing, and then a couple of days after he had quit. So by this point, Cheryl has been found murdered. One of Cheryl's colleagues said they saw Albie, and he had this really deep cut on his hand that he kept wrapped in a big bandage.
Hold on, big fella. You developed an obsession for a woman, and you sent her to the afterlife. How are you going to get her? You're done.
Detectives would also discover that Albie's father lived right near PJ's Market, and Albie's...
If at first you don't succeed, pick yourself up and try again, big fella.
His mother lived right near the area where Cheryl's car had been found, out near Lake Union. And so suddenly, Roland's previously odd-seeming story about some random young man following Cheryl around before she was murdered made a lot of sense. It seemed like Albie was this strange young man Roland was talking about. When detectives tracked Albie down, he was sullen and totally uncooperative. But eventually, the police got him to talk, and he would tell them that he had cut his hand fishing. And so police rounded up all these people Albie said he had been fishing with when he cut his hand, and in separate interviews, all of those people confirmed that Albie was telling the truth.
Ooh.
And also police knew that even though circumstantially Albie looked really suspicious, there was not a single shred of actual evidence that tied him to Cheryl's death. And so pretty quickly, Albie was let go, and the police at that point kind of hit a dead end in this case. And in fact, the case went totally cold at this point. And then, one day in 2002, so 14 years...
Jeez Louise.
After Cheryl was murdered, a man in prison got word out to police that he actually knew exactly who killed Cheryl. He said the murderer's name was Frederick J. McKee, and that he was currently incarcerated for cooking meth. Now, we don't know exactly how this inmate knew Frederick was the killer.
He's a chef.
But this inmate who called police was cellmates with Frederick McKee, and so very likely he overheard Frederick say something incriminating, and so this inmate called the police. And so police got a DNA sample from McKee, and they compared his sample to the skin cells that were found on the duct tape that had been used to bind Cheryl's hands when she was killed, and unbelievably, it was a match. Frederick was the killer. But as police dug deeper, they quickly realized that, Frederick's heinous actions of actually killing Cheryl was not the worst part of the story. The story of what really happened to Cheryl Pitre was so insanely nonsensical that right away, newspapers all over the country began to cover it. It was converted into a true crime documentary. And even
told on YouTube by Mr. Baldwin. Come on, man.
Even a famous author wrote a book about it. I mean, this story really was just totally sensational. First, I'm going to give you the facts of what happened to Cheryl. And then I'm going to give you the absurd and tragic explanation for why these things happened to Cheryl. Late on the night of October 15th, 1988, so the night that Cheryl disappeared, the meth cook, Frederick J. McKee, ambushed Cheryl as she came home from PJ's Market. We don't know exactly where the ambush happened, but we think it happened right outside of Cheryl's home. And after he ambushed her, he forced her into her own trunk. He bound her hands and...
Bruh, I remember those freaking strollers, chat.
Then began savagely beating her. Now, based on her injuries, Cheryl obviously put up a big fight, kicking and punching and trying her best to get out of the trunk, but eventually Frederick had taken the actual metal of the trunk and began slamming it down on Cheryl's face.
Oh my
and
God.
that allowed him to overpower her and eventually beat her to death. And then after she was dead, he shut the trunk with Cheryl inside of her car, and then he drove her car all the way out to Lake Union, and then he abandoned the car with Cheryl still inside of it.
That's crazy.
And chucked her purse into the water. But this terrible night was not supposed to go this way. Here's what was going on in the background. At the same time that Cheryl was closing up shop at PJ's Market and beginning her trip back home, her ex-husband, Roland, on the other side of town, was sitting in his house anxiously checking his watch, waiting for the right time to launch this big plan that was going to win Cheryl back.
He hired her to get kidnapped. He was going to save her. And, oh, you should be back with me. But he didn't show up. So the dude was like, yo, where's my money? I'm going to get in trouble for this. I'm a killer. You know what I'm saying? I can't get caught for this. I'm locking in that answer, chat. I'm locking in that answer.
Roland's big plan was that he was going to save Cheryl's life.
Come on. Come on. Hey, look, we here. We here.
He had hired his buddy, Frederick J. McKee, the meth cook, who he had met in prison, and he had given Frederick a spare key to Cheryl's house. McKee was instructed by Roland to sneak into Cheryl's place before 11 p.m., so before she came home from work, and then when she got home, McKee was supposed to jump out and ambush her and tie her up and abduct her.
This is sick. This is sick. Even if you got her back, if she found this out, what are you going to do? You're done.
Roland had actually gone with McKee to a hardware store to purchase the rope and duct tape that McKee would use to tie Cheryl up. But when McKee actually got to the point in the plan where he was physically removing Cheryl from her home to go take her who knows where, that was when Roland was going to jump in and save the day. And Roland had really thought about how this moment was going to go.
Okay.
He was going to kick the front door in and jump inside and scream at McKee, "You can't do this!" and then attack him with his judo skills until McKee ran off scared, at which point Roland would cut Cheryl free and she would grab onto him and say, "Oh my goodness, you saved me."
This is a sick man, chat. Just do the right thing, okay? Look, I'm about to give you relationship advice. If you do the right thing the first time, all right, you're going to be all right, all right? My man cheated, left, killed another dude for a girl, came back, married her again, had another baby, and then cheated. And now you had to set all this up to get her back. You're done.
I love you. I need you. And then after this, Roland believed they would get back together and they would live happily ever after.
Insane.
However, on the night of October 15th at 11:30, when Roland looked at his watch and saw it was time to go save his ex-wife, he stood up so quickly from the couch because he was so excited to go do this thing that he had one of his low blood pressure episodes and he fainted. And then when he came to a little while later, instead of going out the door to really at this point stopping this abduction from happening, Roland just kind of trudged upstairs and went to sleep. And this was a really big problem because Frederick J. McKee, the meth cook, he was hired to actually abduct Cheryl. He was not aware that this was actually a setup for Roland to come in and
Oh, you're done. You're done.
save the day. McKee literally believed Roland wanted him to abduct his wife. And he didn't ask any questions. He just said, "Okay, I'll do that." And then when...
Yo, this is why as a CEO, as a leader, as a boss, in this case, you know what I'm saying, you couldn't be a man and keep your words to your wife. That's why you ended up in this situation anyway. Okay. But being a good person, you got to have communication skills, chat. Oh, hey, listen, I need you to abduct my wife, but it's fake. All right. So don't be too rough. Be convincing. You know, I'm going to pay you to do that. You got the skills. You a meth cook. You're a criminal. All right. So, you know, drum it up. All right. I know you've been out here doing your thing. So you're going to abduct her. Now, if you leave one mark on her, I'm going to have to send you to the afterlife, big fella. but just be gentle, all right? But make it convincing. And I'm going to come in just like Jet Li on the one, and I'm going to pop out. And I'm going to put that work in. And you're going to run away. And I'm going to get my woman back. That's the plan, okay? That's how you communicate a plan. You tell them the whole thing, okay? This man told me, hey, look, go kidnap my wife. Now I got the person ready to kidnap my wife. Now I just got to show up. Now what if he actually kidnaps her? Let's see what happens.
Roland didn't show up. Frederick went through with the actual abduction of Cheryl, and
once you abduct, if the person doesn't come collect them, that person is now going to be a person who can tell on you, right? If I abduct somebody and my plan is to go give them to somebody and I get stuck with them, what am I supposed to do? You know what I'm saying? So my man probably was like, yo, Cheryl, they gonna have to spam F for you, my baby.
This abduction, things got out of hand, and Frederick wound up beating Cheryl to death.
Crazy.
Both Roland and McKee would be convicted for the murder of Cheryl Petrie. And by the time the cops had finally solved this cold case, Roland was actually already in prison for attempting to kidnap the son of another ex-wife in a...
This is a sick man. Y'all should have got Roland off the streets the first time. This is crazy.
An effort to impress this ex-wife. It had not worked. Roland was ultimately sentenced to 40 years in prison, which was on top of the 25 years he was already serving, and McKee would get 20 years.
Yo, Roland is a boy, and McKee got 20. He should be out by now. Where's his story? Hey, look, Mr. Ballin, we need that story time, big fella. I might become the Gail King of true horror shorts. True horror stories. What are these called? Something like that. True crime documentaries. I might have to be the Gail King of true crime documentary. Hey, big fella. So when he told you to abduct her, what was going through your mind? When you abducted her and nobody showed up to collect, what did you feel you had to do next? When you found out it was supposed to be a joke and you did 20 years for it, how did that make you feel? I could be Gail King of you know what I'm saying, the true horror short. I'm gonna ask the hard hitting questions. Okay, let's finish this. Hey man, listen. That boy right there could have avoided all of this by not cheating, okay? That's all you had to do. Clearly she had that fire because you kept coming back, all right? She had your daughters for you, or she had your children, one girl, one boy. You had the life. She even took you back when you cheated the first time and you still ruined it. Now you got to spend the rest of your life in... Listen, you're going to be... There's Joe jokes to be there, but we're going to leave those alone, you know what I'm saying?